Greetings to all. Very good afternoon to those from Chennai, and greetings to all from the rest of the location.
Kolkata, sir?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Could I make a start?
Yeah, just a minute. I can hear background music. Raj, can you check that? Sugata sir, மட்டும் விட்டு மத்ததெல்லாம் மியூட் பண்ணிருங்க. அந்த மாதிரி மியூசிக் ஏதோ பேக்ரவுண்ட் மியூசிக் எங்க இருக்கு? Sir, can we wait for another 5 minutes?
Absolutely, no problem.
Thank you.
Problem.
Sangeeta, kindly start.
Good evening to one and all present here. On behalf of Nazareth College of Arts and Science and University Global Coalition, it's an immense pleasure to welcome you all to this session on strengthening resilience and collaboration for wetlands. I welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Sugato Dutt, IFS, retired officer, Indian Forestry Service, Chennai. I welcome our beloved principal, Nazareth College of Arts and Science, Dr. Mary Angeline Santosham, for this session. I welcome our deans, HODs, faculties, students, and other participants to this wonderful session. Now I welcome Mr. Feben Abraham Verkes, Assistant Professor, Department of Social Work, to introduce our chief guest.
Good afternoon, all. I am profoundly delighted to take this opportunity to introduce the chief guest of the evening, Dr. Sugato Dutt, IFS, who is currently the Chief Executive Officer, Tamil Nadu Compensatory Afforestation Management and Planning Authority. Dr. Dutt joined the Indian Forest Service in the year 1985, the Tamil Nadu cadre. During his long career span, he has extensive experience in the field of participatory protected area management, captive breeding, and issues related to public outreach in wildlife conservation, as also social forestry throughout the country. He has worked with government agencies, research and training institutions, national and international NGOs, including the Worldwide Fund for Nature, CARE for International Forestry Research, and GIS. He also served the Dehradun-based Wildlife Institute of India as faculty there. He has been a recipient of several academic distinctions, including the East-West Center Graduate Degree Fellow and Best Regional Paper at the Association of Pacific Coast Geographers, United States. He obtained a doctoral degree in human geography from the University of Hawaii, United States, with his field research on the impact of wildlife protection legislation in Buksa Tiger Reserve, West Bengal, India. His recent assignments include policy analysis and management in biodiversity conservation in Tamil Nadu state, and also land use management at the State Planning Commission, Tamil Nadu. He has widespread experience in training and capacity building in the forestry sector, both within India and abroad. We are very glad to have you, sir. Once again, we welcome you, and the stage is all yours, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very generous introduction. And on my part, I'm delighted, absolutely delighted to be part of the Global University Coalition. And in this discussion today online across the globe on a subject that is quite close to my heart, and that is of sustainable development. I shall speak of sustainable development today in the context of my own city, the city of Chennai. And I notice among the participants, they are from South Africa as well. And I think these are two cities, Cape Town and Chennai, which face acute shortages of the water as a resource. And we would like to share with every participant today what we do in terms of conserving water as one of the sustainable development goals. My talk, therefore, is focused on the wetlands of Chennai and how we manage the wetlands sustainably with community collaboration and other very vital stakeholders in this particular agenda. I would request that my slides be shared, and I'm hoping it's visible to all. I shall begin then. The topic today is strengthening resilience and collaboration for the wetlands of Chennai. My talk would be roughly in 3 sections. I will start, of course, with an introduction to the concepts of sustainable development itself. I will go on from there to describe how the city of Chennai is involved with this agenda of strengthening resilience and collaboration for its wetlands. And I will end once again with a few reflections on the concept of sustainable development itself. May I have the first slide, please? Thank you. So we will talk of wetlands, and I will try to define them and explain to you what wetlands are. Wetlands are typically areas that are flooded with water for nearly the entire year. And they contain a particular set of plant species, which we call hydrophytes. If you look at the little diagram below, you will see some of them could be well submerged completely below water, and some of the plants could be halfway between water and the land surface. The soil in wetlands is what we call hydric. In other words, it doesn't allow too much penetration, and that's the reason, penetration of water, that is, and that's the reason why the water accumulates in these bodies and becomes a wetland. Wetlands could be of various types, and the little diagram on the right of the screen, what you can see is wetlands could be ponds, they could be meadows, they could be marshes, they could be swamps, and they could be also partly flowing water, which is wet rivers and streams. Next slide. Well, there are several kinds of wetlands in Chennai also, and you can see some of them represented in the pictures here. Right in the center of the picture, right in the center of the slide, you can see that there are marshes in Chennai. And these marshes exist together with the fantastic real estate growth that has taken place in Chennai. On the picture on the top left happens to be of an estuary that empties into the Bay of Bengal. This is the Koshasthalia River flowing into the Bay of Bengal. And to the bottom right, you'll see something that we call the Buckingham Canal. Now, the Buckingham Canal was a big navigational canal about 100 years ago. And it took some ships and barrages as well. Today, it's very much dried up. And you can see its banks have been encroached. And a lot of the encroachers are amongst the poorest people who reside within of Chennai. So Buckingham Canal is only a shadow of the past. This is some glimpse that I give of the variety of wetlands in Chennai. Next slide, please. Let's get into the idea of sustainable development, what the concept is, how it originated, and then we'll get on to this whole business of sustainable development goals. Next slide. Now, I'll speak of sustainable development in the context of Chennai, and I would like to share with you right in the beginning a little idea of what the geography of Chennai is. Because I myself am a geographer, and I'm very much fascinated by the patterns of land formation within any area of study. The topography or the lay of the land in Chennai is rather flat, and it's drained by not one but two, actually 4 rivers. And the rivers arise at some distance. They are all rain fed, and they arise at some distance in the Eastern Ghat Hills, which are quite away from Chennai city. There are a huge number of lakes and marshlands in the landscape of Chennai. There is an estimation that there were as many as 3,000 small and large water bodies or lakes about 100 years ago. Now the number has shrunk tremendously in the recent past, and Chennai is nothing but a shadow of its past in terms of the water bodies that it contains. This picture will give you an idea of the lay of the land in Chennai, and you can see that the rivers drain into the Bay of Bengal, which is the seascape somewhere to the bottom 1/3 of the picture. Next slide. Now, the demographics of Chennai. Chennai is a large city, and it's been growing very, very rapidly. It has a growth rate of about 2.24% annually. And there's a population currently at about nearly 9 million. This is from the figures of the census of 2011. So definitely it's been increased, and the projected increase stands at a figure of 12 million by 2022. Now, the metropolitan area of Chennai is enormous. The figures given by the authorities is about 426 square kilometers. But what is most important is that Chennai is a center of industrial production, and it has the third highest GDP among the cities of India, the major metropolitan cities of India. It stands third after Mumbai and Delhi. Next slide, please. Now let's understand what sustainable development is. A sustainable development is a fairly recent concept in the development story, or the story of economic development. It is a combination of human development, or all human capacities, whether by wealth or education or technical skills, and it combines that set of human development indicators with an ability to sustain the natural resources. In other words, it provides economic well-being to society by conserving the natural resources which are the foundation of the economy of any society. Next slide, please. The Human Development Index. Now, this is something that the United Nations Development Program has been looking into in great deal of detail. The 60s and the 1970s have been very, very significant in developing human development indices, or HDIs. They're a combination of indices for long, healthy life, for knowledge, as well as a decent standard of living. Now, these indices combine together to form a compound index, which is called HDI, or the Human Development Index. Now, this third one, the decent standard of living, is important because this involves both the alleviation or the removal of poverty. In addition to that, good health, and that comes from absolutely positive inputs in hygiene as well. Now, if you notice, these three subsets that form the HDI does not include any environmental parameter. Now, the sustainable development takes care of that, as we shall see in the next slide. Next slide, please. How did the concept of sustainable development begin? Now, somewhere in the early 1970s, the global interest in the environment began. And there was a World Conference on the Environment in Stockholm in 1972. And somewhere after that, a commission on sustainable development was set up by Brundtland. Brundtland chaired the commission, and she wrote, along with her colleagues, a report called Our Common Future. And sustainable development was defined in this unique document. It was called development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Well, this is what is vital in sustainable development. all the enormous needs, whether of resources, whether of good quality life, or whether of education, they need to be met. But the future does not need to be compromised. Next slide, please. So therefore, we have a combination of different indices coming together in the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 SDGs. The first, of course, is extremely vital, that sees a complete halt to poverty. And thereafter, there is a halt to hunger. There is good health and well-being. There's quality education. There's gender equality, and so on and so forth. We will focus for today on Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which is clean water and sanitation. And I shall talk more about it as we go along. Next slide, please. Now, each of these Sustainable Development Goals has a number of targets. If you have goals, you must have targets. And in this particular case, we are interested in target 6.1 and 6.4. Let's take a look at them. By 2030, target 6.1 says we should be able to achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all. Target 6.4, by 2030, we should substantially increase water use efficiency across all sectors and ensure sustainable withdrawals and supply of fresh water to address the problem of water scarcity. Now, those of us that live in Chennai or other relatively dry areas of the world will know what it is to experience water scarcity. And the target of 6.4 is to substantially increase water use efficiency across sectors and to make sure that both the supply of fresh water as well as its withdrawal addresses the issue of water scarcity. Next slide, please. Let's look at how this plays out in our own favorite city, that is Chennai. I shall talk of the economic growth recently experienced in Chennai and how that economic growth has been impacting the natural resources of Chennai, principally water, but also land. And then we shall discuss what are the issues in the rising demand for water and the challenges in the supply of water within Chennai city. Next slide. Okay, now Tamil Nadu, southern Indian state, has one of the highest growth rates of the economy among all the states of India. It's developed extensively well. All human development indicators are well above the national average. And what is very significant, it has a high share of women in employment. But even more significant is that Tamil Nadu, in the recent past, has become a very urbanized economy. About 55% of Tamil Nadu's population resides in urban areas, and this number is going to rapidly increase in the coming years. However, despite this very impressive development, we notice that there is relatively lower standards of health as well as sanitation in this state. What this means is, although longevity, that is the life expectation, is reasonably ahead of national averages, but there are several issues of sanitation, access to drinking water, as well as access to sanitation, that is sewerage connections in our urban setup, is somewhat lower, relatively lower than the national average. This comes as a bit of a surprise, but that is because there are higher levels of inequality in our society. What that means is, particularly in the context of Chennai, you'd find thousands and thousands of individuals with high net worth assets, very high, very rich individuals. But they are alongside quite a number of people who live in the slums and suffer fairly low levels of income. They are, particularly in the last 2 years, with the impact of COVID, there have been a rise in unemployment, and therefore the levels of inequality are quite high within our society. Now, even though there are great opportunities that are coming in terms of growth, there are interlinkages between urbanization, water, health, and sanitation. This we'll look into a little more closely in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, the water demand, obviously, in Chennai is extremely high. I said before, it's among the larger metropolises in the country. It is actually, in terms of its population, the 36th largest population cluster in the entire world. And what is unique is the supply of water in the city of Chennai depends on winter rains. So the bulk of the rainfall it comes to Chennai in the months of November and December, and the rest of the year is relatively quite dry, barring a few showers in the summer. And so Chennai suffers alternatively from floods as well as droughts. Now, the requirement of water in Chennai is about 800 odd million liters per day for that entire vast teeming population of Chennai. There is a requirement of more than 800 million liters every day. And this statistic will rise to 1,077 by the year 2050. 1,077 million liters per day will need to be supplied for the needs. So the demand of water is exceedingly high because the population projected will be about 12 million in the coming 1 decade. So, next slide, please. Chennai's economic growth is a wonderful story. As many of you would probably know, it is an automobile manufacturing hub. A large number of automobile companies function from Chennai. They include Japanese and American companies. Chennai is also very well known for its IT industry and IT-enabled services. You can see a picture of the PayPal here. There are a number of other offshore, back offices of major global multinational corporations that function from Chennai. Chennai is very well known for healthcare services as well. Not only is there the globally well-known Apollo Hospital group, but several other equally prominent groups function from Chennai. It's a huge center for the leather industry. Leather exports give huge revenues to the state of Chennai, to the state of Tamil Nadu, and function right out of Chennai. It's also very well known for the film industry and attracts a very large number of tourists from across the globe. Now, so it's a booming economic engine that functions within of Chennai. And obviously, that attracts a very large number of migrants, not only from all across the state of Tamil Nadu, but also from various other parts of the country and abroad. There's a very, very large expatriate population residing in Chennai. It consists of Koreans, Japanese, and others from the Middle East as well. Next slide, please. However, now take note of one very important fact, that although the demand for water is 800 liters or more, million liters or more per day, the dependable water supply is about 100 million liters less than that. Now, what this means is there's an acute scarcity of water. The picture on the top right will show you what happens during the periods of drought when water has to be supplied in tankers, and you can see that there's a scramble to get one small plastic pot of water in piped water supplies that come in tankers from the outskirts of Chennai into the city. And this is especially acute for the poorer sections of society, and it affects and impacts others which are relatively well off as well. At the bottom of this particular slide, you will see two striking pictures. This is a picture of the Red Hills Lake, or the Pural Lake as it's called. And you can see how it is completely surrounded by human settlements. There are a huge number of concrete infrastructure around, including houses around the lake. And in certain seasons, you can see how the lake boundary completely shrinks. And these are the phenomena that add to the scarcity of water within of Chennai city. So this is just some pictures to show you that there is a huge gap between the water demand and the supply within Chennai. Next slide, please. Now, the dependable water sources are quite a few. There are a huge number of large and small reservoirs. I showed you a picture of the Red Hills Reservoir or the Pural Lake. There are about 6 or 7 other small and large reservoirs addressing the water needs of the city. There's also a very large tank called the Veeranam tank, which gets water supplied to the city. Veeranam tank is about 200 kilometers away from Chennai, but it still is able to supply through very large pipelines water to Chennai. Now, Chennai depends a lot on groundwater, and it also depends on water from the Telugu Ganga project, which is the Krishna River across the border in Andhra Pradesh. So we do depend on states outside also for our water supply needs. And when all these fail, because the dependable water is limited to 165 million liters per day in our reservoirs, a lot of loss takes place through evaporation. There is also a loss through leakages in our pipelines. There is inability in the reservoirs and the groundwater to store the resource because of failed monsoonal rains. And sometimes we have arguments and prolonged discussions with our neighboring state. So even for Krishna water is not available. In fact, the deficit is very high. About 931 million liters per day is promised from the Telugu Ganga project, but we have only a dependence on an assured supply of only 233 million liters per day. Now, what you see in the picture at the bottom is a desalination plant, which means it takes water from the sea and it removes the salt contents and supplies it through a very large and costly machinery, and supplies water to this particular desalination plant is in Vadanemelli in the south of Chennai, but there are a large number of other desalination plants being set up in the coastal region. Now, to summarize, as against the demand of 2,118 million liters per day, we get an assured supply of only 730 million liters per day. So this is to emphasize the scarcity of water within Chennai. Next slide, please. Now, how did this happen? Why did the scarcity happen? If you see this set of maps here, you see on the left the water bodies that were there in Chennai in 1980. And like I told you right in the beginning, there are about 3,000 water bodies, large and small, at that point in time in our recent history. And you will see in the diagram on the right, on the map on the right, that there's a huge growth in built-up area. Houses, factories, roads, skyscrapers, and so on and so forth. And you can see the phenomenal growth that has taken place in the last approximately 30 years, and how this is in the process completely eliminated many of the water bodies that are present in the city. Now, if you go to the next slide, I will build up this a little more explicitly. Next slide, please. You can see that the ratio of wetlands and built-up area, how it is changing. In 1980, very approximately 4/5 of the landscape was wetlands. And see how the ratio is completely reversed by 2010. And a large chunk of red that you're seeing represents the growth in the built-up area. And you can see how the blue, namely the water bodies, have been shrinking over the decades. So there's a complete decrease or even elimination, some would say, in the wetlands of Chennai in the last 3 to 4 decades. Next slide, please. Now let's revisit sustainable development. We should see how a large number of stakeholders influence the supply and distribution of drinking water. And there are, of course, a large number of legislations and rules and statutory bodies that regulate the supply of water. But there are certain issues of community collaboration and collaboration between these stakeholders, which include the state agencies. And it is this collaborative effort that is able to give an assurance of sustainable development as far as water is concerned. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at the stakeholders in the water supply, right? You will see that they are external aid agencies that come to our rescue as far as water is concerned. There's a picture of World Bank officials on the bottom right of the picture. And they bring enormously expensive, costly projects. And you can see right in the center, the Kirpok Water Works is one of the important water supply infrastructure within the city. However, if you take a look at the picture on the upper left, you will see that in the supply of water, the expensive infrastructure that supplies water, there is a strong possibility of leakages happening. And this is what reduces the efficiency of water supply, other than the fact that drought, lack of rainfall, reduces the groundwater that is available, that is pumped up. And yes, please. I see that there are some questions. I could. Am I visible? I do see myself, and my video is operating. So
Yes, sir, you are visible.
There was a request to switch on the camera, and I hope now it's okay. Can I continue? Okay, I'll continue. Other than that, there are issues of private supply of water through rainwater harvesting. People do buy water from water tankers. These are not supplied by the state agencies, and communities get together. This is a picture on the top right corner that's showing you the labor involved in a process that is called Kudi Maramarath, and that takes care of deepening the reservoirs or desilting the reservoirs. So there are lots of stakeholders in the supply of water. And if you go over to the next slide, we'll look at some of the issues in the demand and supply. I mentioned that there is a lot of inefficiency in the supply of water. There are leakages, and that results in the low liters per capita delivered. There is the issue of quality and portability. Not all of the water that is supplied is drinkable. A lot of it is used by the big industries, and that need not be drinking water. The industries do not recycle or reuse the water. They use huge quantities of water. And so the overall supply tends to be somewhat inefficient. It is irregular and intermittent. A lot of water is pumped only a few hours a day. You do not get water 24/7. You may, at the extreme events, sometimes get water about 2 to 3 times a week. So this causes a lack of consumer confidence, and people are not willing to pay any substantial amount for the water that they receive from the municipality. And this then lets the municipalities go on a loss. And therefore, this is like a vicious cycle where you continuously produce inefficient water supply, and you lead to consumer dissatisfaction. So the consumers are compelled to augment their water from private sources. They are compelled to look at reuse and recycled water. And I can summarize the entire set of discussions we've had so far in the next slide. If you could have the next slide, please. Now, there is a lot of legislation that has to be enforced. Now, an amendment to the Tamil Nadu Municipalities Act makes it compulsory to store rainwater in the rooftops. But sometimes you have to have the municipal authorities and the politicians run after you and make sure that that part of the act is implemented. Now, the Tamil Nadu combined water and building rules also require that you seek appropriate permission before sinking bore wells to augment your supply of water for domestic consumption. There are a number of wetland conservation rules under the Wetlands Act. There's a national environmental policy that requires the state government to conserve the waters from wetlands in the country. And to ensure that all these acts and regulations are actually enforced, you have a national green tribunal. And very recently, the tribunal has demanded the state of Tamil Nadu to ensure that an efficient supply and a proper maintenance of the wetlands takes place within the state. So these are the few things that I did want to say. I want to end on an optimistic note. Now, development can be reconciled and it can be made sustainable. Development in wetlands can be reconciled. You can see a picture on the top left. This is of the Pallikaranai marsh, and that has been protected quite well in the recent past. And you can see how, despite increased infrastructure, the ecological components of the Pallikaranai marsh have remained reasonably intact. You can see in the middle picture that the aquatic plants that I spoke of in the first slide are blooming and blossoming in the Pallikaranai marsh, and so as the bird life in the Pallikaranai marsh. You can see a purple moorhen, those of you who are familiar with birds. This is the purple moorhen at the bottom center of the picture of the slide, the picture at the bottom center. And so we think that the wetland ecosystem is being conserved in Chennai despite this phenomenal development pressures and the demands of water. This is what sustainable development should be about. With these words, I'd like to conclude. Thank you all. Be happy to receive
Thank you
questions.
so much, sir. It was such an eye-opener for us. Let's have a photo session before question and answer section. I request all the participants to switch on their cameras so that we can have a photo session. I kindly request all the participants to switch on their cameras. Thank you, everyone. Sir, I hope everyone have understood about the wetlands and also about sustainable development. Now I request our principal, Dr. Mary Angeline, to handle the question and answer session. Ma'am, you're not audible, ma'am. No, ma'am, still not audible.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Good evening to all the participants and our speaker, Dr. Sugato. That was an absolutely wonderful presentation on the wetlands of Chennai. Thank you so much for being here in this program and sharing your experience in working with the wetlands. And dear participants, now we are open for a few questions that can be directed to Dr. Sugato. Kindly type your questions if you're not able to come through the voice or you're not able to switch on your camera. You can also raise your hands to direct your questions to the Dr. Sugato. Now, I think, Sangeeta, can you take over for the questions from the chat box?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Yuvraj, I think there is a person who says that the video and audio has been disabled by the admin.
Now what enabled, ma'am?
Yeah, so that's why I think most of them are not able to come on the video. Yeah, thank you. Do you think, Sangeeta, we can take another picture?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Sorry about that technical issue. I request all the participants to switch on their video. Thank you so much, everyone. Participants, if you have any question, you can put that in your chat box.
I think we have a question from Saitun Bibi.
Yes.
How can we conserve wetlands? And I will respond to that. I think, like I said, we get back to the original idea of, controlling the or regulating in some ways the gap between the demand and the growing demand for water. A lot of the water that we both drink and that industries use, as well as some of our farmers use for irrigation, does come from wetlands. And when I say that, I include groundwater that's pumped up from below the soil, and I also include rivers and streams. So this demand has to be managed, and so does the supply. A lot of the water is wasted. It's either leaking or it's overused sometimes in periods of short supply, and so on and so forth. There are plenty of rules and regulations in place. There's also a need to enforce those rules and regulations. So one way is, of course, the state machinery acting. The other way is through community participation, where the existing water bodies could be deepened, they could be, desilted. And the other issue is the wise use of water within our own houses, reducing waste, recycling water, so reuse and recycle water wherever you are, whether it's in your own houses, whether you run an industry, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, it's the wise use of water that will pay off. And of course, there are natural calamities like droughts and so on. But essentially, I think we must all get to agree that there is a need to increase efficiency and reduce inefficiency in our utilization of water. That is how indeed wetlands could be.
Thank you. So there's a question from Mrs. Manu Ranjidam. The question is, what are the threats of wetlands?
The most single important threat is changing land use. As I said before, Chennai has rapidly become urbanized, and you saw in the two maps that I showed how phenomenally the infrastructure has increased and houses have increased. So indeed, growing urbanization is the single biggest threat. And the only way to manage that perhaps is through more efficient land use planning and to decentralize our urban growth, to spread out into more satellite cities, and in the long run, to be able to ensure that large open spaces are left natural. And again, combined with efficient use of water, we think that wetlands can certainly be preserved. The types of wetlands are many. The question was from Mr. Alan Joseph. What are the types of wetlands? The standard wetland that we all know are ponds and lakes. Other than that, when water remains covering shallow bodies for a long period of time, we would have marshes. And marshes typically are what you saw the picture of in Pallikarane in the coastline of Chennai. Rivers and streams are also wetlands, but we don't commonly think of them as wetlands. So rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, marshes, these are the varieties of wetlands.
There is one more question, sir. What are all the schemes and policies by our government to prevent the depletion of wetlands?
The large schemes are actually revamping our water supply systems. Waterworks, improving waterworks and piped water supply, so that leakages are halted completely, and the supply of water is made more efficient. Other than that, there are big schemes to get to capture rainwater, and water saving programs have been implemented all across the country. But we are dependent within of Chennai on as many as 7 large and medium-sized reservoirs. And these are the big schemes in a nutshell: reservoirs and efficient supply through piped infrastructure.
Thank you, sir. Next question is there any connection between Chennai floods and wetlands?
The connection between the floods is because we have destroyed a lot of our wetlands in the past through increased urban infrastructure growth. Now, all of us know that the city of Chennai has grown about something like almost 5 times in the past 30 years. And this growth has increased the use of concrete, and the water cannot penetrate into the ground and collect in the, the artifacts below. So this is the reason why our wetlands are disappearing. The single biggest threat, I would say, is urbanization.
Thank you, sir. Next question is there any wetland database present in India?
There is a requirement to document the wetlands available by the Supreme Court to all states in the country. And so there is 50 wetlands that have been put into the first set of documents by the state of Tamil Nadu. And you can see that in the Wetlands Authority of Tamil Nadu's website that lists all the wetlands in the state of Tamil Nadu. Please go to the Wetlands Authority of Tamil Nadu website and you will see the database there.
The next question is, water saving and conservation programs have been implemented in the surrounding areas? I guess you have answered that question.
Yes.
Is it same to the scheme and policies?
It's related to the answer I gave on the schemes and policies. The single most important thing is to make the use of water more efficient. And a lot of our pipelines are old, they are congested or rusting and so on. They are suffering from corrosion because some of the original infrastructure is about 100 years old in the main city. And this needs to be replaced and the cost is phenomenal. So the state government is working on it, but this will vastly improve the efficient use of.
Thank you, sir. And another question, how do you propose to encourage the youth to start protecting life in water, since all of us play a role in degradation of water?
I think the first thing is to increase awareness on how water may be used, conserved, saved, how the wastage should be stopped. That's the most significant thing. So any number of, talks, debates, video clips would be important. And I think we would also need to educate our politicians to pay attention to this subject and, spend effectively on this very, very important agenda, because water is a very, very vital resource. It covers something like 4/5 of the surface of the planet, if you include the oceans and the seas. But it is wise use of water as a resource that's extremely, extremely important. Any number of communication opportunities should be taken to see that this message goes to each and every individual in society.
Yes, sir. Last question. What technique do you use to prevent swamping and masking for isolation forest anomaly detection?
God, that seems to be a very technical question.
Yes, sir.
I think I need to understand it more carefully. I have a feeling that this is, a question regarding the how do you track pollution within water. There are n number of techniques to track the quality of water. The most important technique is biological oxygen demand, BOD, and there are some instruments that quickly measure that, and that will tell you the status of of water in terms of its pollution and the living resources it can support, whether it's plants or animals, namely fishes. So that's one way, biological oxygen demand. There are a huge number of others. But the most significant one that the Pollution Control Board uses is BOD, biological oxygen demand.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Sugato, I have a question here.
Yes, please.
Yes, we always look upon the government to conserve the wetlands. As a principal of an educational institution, I would like to know how higher education institutions can involve themselves in wetland conservation.
I think the best way to do that is, to enlighten all sections of society, whether okay, so all sections of society, whether it's the common householder or whether it's the civic authority official, continuously meet them, organize lectures, podcasts, have eminent technical speakers come in and speak to individuals. The other way is of developing a database, and it is not as difficult as it sounds, but sources of water, where do they exist? How does the water vary in quality? Whether it's potable, not potable? Who lacks water? How can those who have excess, quantities of water, like the industries, for example, how can they reuse and recycle water so that the volume of water used by them is substantially reduced, and that surplus can be diverted to those who really require them. So these are some of the ways and means in which a college could certainly participate, interact with society, pass on the information, document, collate all the information, build databases, share those databases with all members of society.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your answers. I guess we have come to our end of the session. Now I welcome Ms. Jennifer Sonia Rani, Assistant Professor, Department of Social Work, to deliver the vote of thanks.
It gives me immense pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks for this session to the dignitaries present here. I would like to thank our guest speaker, Dr. Sugato Dutt, who honored this session with his informative presentations. I would like to thank our beloved principal, Dr. Mary Angelin, University Global Coalition, the staff members, students, and all the participants for making this session a successful one. Once again, I thank you all for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you indeed. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sugato. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Goodbye.